Okay, welcome back. Well, we don't have everyone back just yet. The breakout rooms are going to end momentarily, and then we will carry on. If you heard something interesting in your breakout room, type it into the chat box and share it with us. Okay, welcome back, everybody. If you heard something interesting in your breakout room conversation, type it in the chat box. Thank you, Kalpna. Making decisions that can affect the livelihood of team members. Absolutely. Yeah. I apologize for not letting you know exactly how long you're going to be in the breakout room for. I will next time really try to do that. Okay, so yeah, feel free to just use that chat box anytime anytime you are moved to do so. And so let's take a look at what else we've got here with respect to courage. So James Baldwin, the famous American author, wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And I think there's a lot of things that go on in organizations. I think that there are things that people choose to not deal with, people choose to not address. And so that's interesting. So what is that? Is it that you don't want to disturb a hornet's nest? Is it again, is it just too uncertain to address it, to bring it up, to talk about it, to deal with it? There's a multitude of reasons why people don't, but when they do, that requires courage. And again, I think that leaders face things. I think they approach, even when all of your emotions are telling you not to go near. I think leaders go anyway. They feel the fear, they feel the hesitation, the anticipation. Okay, so we have a few more people typing into the chat box here. Standing up for your convictions and values, absolutely, when you know it won't be well received. Excellent, thank you, Valerie. Absolutely, yeah. And there's a lot of things to stand up for, a lot of things to protect, a lot of protests going on right now in the province and elsewhere. So people are, they are summoning their courage and they're standing up for their convictions. The big thing for me is talking to people who are vaxxed and the ones that aren't. Absolutely, yeah. It's hard to understand why people have the positions that they have, why people have the opinions or the beliefs that they hold, and yeah, sometimes we have to deal with them and have a conversation with them, and then what do you say? How do you say it? Do you say something that drives them to be further entrenched into their belief system, or do you, which we call calling someone out, or do you call them in? Do you invite a relationship and a dialogue with them so that you can maintain that relationship to some extent? So yeah, difficult. Uli, courage might be to address the needs of women or NW employees. I don't want to intimidate them, but they may not feel so confident. Sure, absolutely. Some people, I'm guessing that's new employees. Sure, yeah. Don't want to intimidate them. But they may not feel so confident. Absolutely, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that lack of confidence, how to support people with that. Courage to relinquish the anxiety that comes with worrying about what we cannot control. Absolutely, that's a great one from Ben. I think that is. So yeah, making the workplace a safe place for difficult conversations. Absolutely. Yes. In fact, Amy Edmondson, the woman who coined the term psychological safety in her now famous Harvard Business Review article, said that most managers don't have the emotional intelligence to create psychological safety in their workplace. So again, alluding to this set of foundational emotional skills and competencies, which I'm going to talk about shortly. As a younger colleague at my workplace, trying to change the old school mentality that exists. Absolutely, Joel, that old school mentality is everywhere, right? We're doing it this way because we've always done it this way. I have spoken to very disheartened new employees at major organizations who said, listen, if you know what you're talking about, we want to create that here, but it's so disheartening and so discouraging when the people who have the power aren't interested. They're not interested in change. They're just interested in counting the days, checking the days off on their calendar till they retire. And wow, how sad is that, right? So again, the courage to face what needs to be changed, what has to change. Generational and work experience divide, absolutely. Thank you for that. Kalpna, hey, I'm a visible minority female who's always worked in a male-dominated field. That would take courage, absolutely, Kalpna. And absolutely, I'm an old white guy. Doesn't take a lot of courage to face other old white guys, but when I was young, yeah, the old boys bastion, you know, at the top, that's hard to face. That takes courage to point out the fact that maybe the emperor has no clothes, right? The old story. That's hard. That's difficult and requires courage. Agree, and to not be afraid to share your opinions. Absolutely, Krista. Yes, thank you. Jen, I'm a lead for health and safety for my work group, and it sometimes takes courage to tell coworkers when they aren't following safety regulations, especially if they're my superior. Absolutely, Jen, I'm so with you on that. And I just think that, you know, we need to provide the training for people so that they can develop the kinds of relationships where they feel like when you're pointing out that I'm not following the safety regulations, it feels like you're having my back versus calling me out. Again, you know, not calling people out, calling people into safety, calling people into relationship, calling people into dialogue. This is what we want to do. So absolutely. Thank you so much for your comments, everyone. Let's move on. I'm going to introduce this interesting idea here to you next. Filling the role of shop steward, always having to confront management about shortcomings can feel like it's detrimental to your career. Absolutely, Roland. Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation that is often as a result of the way that management chooses to create relationships with unions, that it's this adversarial thing, right? Everybody's always butting heads over stuff. Really, people need to be pulling in the same direction. Well, how do we get to that? How do we have the kind of relationship which feels like there's respect and trust enough so that we can get on the same side and create organizational effectiveness? I sometimes feel like when I go in to talk to management, and they're nodding and thinking that, you know, yes, we need to increase our organizational effectiveness, and I sometimes feel like union is saying, wait a minute, you can't do that. We're not doing that, because, you know, that would mean that, you know, work would be more efficient or better, and somehow, and then we would lose jobs. Or why can't we get everybody on the same page and get everybody working towards the same ends? So filling the, yeah, absolutely. So let's carry on and look at this next one. This has something to do with what we're talking about here. Brene Brown says you can't get to courage without walking through vulnerability. So what do you think she means by that? I am going to send you off into breakout rooms again. What does she mean when she says you can't get to courage without walking through vulnerability? Just want you to chat about that for a few minutes in breakout sessions. I'm just going to give you 3 minutes for this one, and that should be enough time to just share a few quick ideas about this. We're going to recreate those rooms and send you off again. You can't get to vulnerability without first going through, sorry, you can't get to courage without first going through vulnerability. Okay, welcome back to those of you who are back already. We still have the rest of the group on their way back. It's like the transporter room on Star Trek. You just kind of appear and just bounce from place to place. Okay, there we've got almost everybody back. There we go. Okay. Okay, awesome. So, what is our definition of vulnerability? Well, our definition of vulnerability is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. So who wants to open themselves up to harm? It's actually the literal definition of vulnerability is opening oneself up to harm. Who wants to do that? Nobody. So we keep safe, we stay safe, we make sure that we're not vulnerable, but we lose this ability to connect with others. And really that's what I'm getting to, and that's what I want to zero in on and focus on. The old adage, if you're not scared, it's not brave. The thing that you're doing is not brave. Yeah, absolutely. If it's not a scary thing that you're about to do, pick something bigger, something scarier. There's lots of great old sayings, and I happen to love old sayings. So you can't get to courage without walking through vulnerability. Brene Brown is really talking about being in this world, being in this social world, being with others, connecting with others, and we have to let ourselves be known by others, and that's the vulnerability part. That's the exposing ourselves part. I was trying to think of a good corporate example. I don't know if it's the best corporate example, but do you remember when someone tampered with Tylenol and there was some sort of they had put poison or something and made people sick, or maybe even, I don't know if anybody died, but the senior executive of Tylenol decided to take responsibility for that, to take accountability for that, to pull all the bottles of Tylenol off the shelves. And I thought it was a brave and bold move, but it's a bit of a vulnerable move, right? It's like, will people ever trust us again? And so because they took accountability at that level, they were vulnerable by saying, hey, someone messed with our supply chain and we're pulling all the bottles of Tylenol off. And then they recreated a new tamper-proof bottle top, and wow, you know, the trust that maintained with some people and built with others was incredible. But it was because they chose to take. They could have said, "Hey, it's not our issue. We shipped it out and it was fine." Somewhere along the line, someone did something and this happened, but they didn't. They said, "Hey, it's our responsibility to make sure that people can't tamper with our products," they were vulnerable. And it took an incredible, it just displayed and demonstrated a tremendous amount of courage ultimately. And that's what we human beings have to learn. So here's this little fish taking this bold, courageous move of moving from one tank to another. And so how do we define courage? Well, I thought Maya Angelou, once again, another author, had the most beautiful description. Courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. There's an interesting idea. So without courage, we don't really practice other virtues consistently. That's interesting. And once again, I want to sort of use this notion of courage as being the willingness to face uncertainty, and with being in an uncertain world, which was certainly brought about by COVID and the pandemic and all the changes that has mandated, both to our businesses businesses and to our communities and to our families and to the world. And so that took a lot of courage for those of you to face those changes, for those of you to pivot. It's an overused word as a result of the pandemic, right? Everybody's had to pivot, but it's also a very visual word, right? Everybody has had to pivot and change the way you do things. I haven't been to an airport in over 18 months. That's the longest in much of my adult life that I've not been to an airport. And so we do have to change things. We have to face these changes with courage. We know they're uncertain, but we face them anyway. The alternative is to avoid them. And what we know is when we avoid situations and circumstances that need to be addressed, they don't get better on their own, do they? They get worse. So we have to face things that we know are going off the rails, have gone off the rails, have, in terms of all the things that all of you are juggling, some things have fallen to the floor. So what's fallen to the floor? Should it stay on the floor, or should we stoop down and pick it up and get it back in the juggling rotation? All of those things require courage because it's uncertain. Are we going to succeed? Are we not going to succeed? We don't know, but we face it and we move on. Okay, so what does this have to do with emotional intelligence? Well, this is the reason why we have this concept of emotional intelligence, because our brains process logic and reason and emotion both at the same time. And this is why I don't like the binary of EQ on one side and IQ on the other, is because it's more like EQ and IQ work like this. They don't work separately and apart. There's nothing that we ever do that is purely logic or reason, and there's nothing that we ever, or there's very little that we ever do, which is pure emotion. And I think that Jill Bolte Taylor, the famous neuroanatomist, said it best. She said, after 3 decades of neuroscience research, we used to, before all of that, we thought that we human beings were thinking creatures who feel. She said, now, with all we know about how emotions work and how our brains are just flooded with, in fact, the part of our brain that informs the logical part of our brain is there's much more information flowing that way than there is the other way. So she says, now we know we're actually feeling creatures who think. And think about that for a moment. In fact, when you look at at carbon dating of early human beings, the part of the brain that processes emotions and emotional information on the brainstem, those are much older than the neocortex. It's right in the name, neocortex, new cortex, the new part of our brain. That part which processes logic and reason is new, relatively speaking. And so those emotions kept us alive. Fear kept us away from situations which would end our lives in order to maintain our survival. Love and joy, these kinds of feelings when we were around others, kept us together so that we worked together for our very survival back when we were, whatever we were, when we were primitive human beings, cave dwellers, tree dwellers, who knows? So I'm sure some archaeologists would have better information than I about the early humans. In any case, what we know is that you can't use cold, hard logic. If you ever say to someone, hey, let's leave emotions out of this decision, let's just use cold, hard logic, it's actually not physiologically possible. So, okay, so let's be intelligent about emotions. What do you do if you're going to be intelligent about emotions? That's when we turn to models like this one. So this model was created by a guy named Reuven Bar-On. It is the basis for the first scientific assessment for emotional intelligence. It's called the Emotional Quotient Inventory. It was created starting in 1981 and published after almost 2 decades of research in 1997 when I first got involved with it. So this is one of the world's leading tools for measuring and understanding how well or or how poorly you're doing with emotional skills and competencies. We call them EQ competencies, and there are 15 of them, and they have their own discrete properties and applications. And so we're going to look at a few of those in relation to courage and understand more about how developing your competency in one of these emotional skills is actually going to help you with courage. So the first one is self-regard. This guy, Thucydides, in ancient Greece, one of the philosophers, he said, the secret of happiness is freedom, and the secret of freedom is courage. That's a really interesting way to think about it. And if you think about it further, it is the courage to do what you want to do versus what anyone else wants to do. It's the courage to believe in yourself. And this is where self-regard comes in. So self-regard is one of our 15 EQ competencies, and it's all about how you regard yourself. And if you regard yourself as someone who is confident and competent, and you tell yourself, hey, a pandemic, I can do this, I can get through this somehow, then you're going to have more courage. And you know what your strengths are, and you focus on your strengths, and you say, hey, I've had setbacks in my life, I've faced adversity, I've come through it, this is what I can do. And again, going back to someone made, sort of alluded to what we know as the Serenity Prayer, that wonderful old, full of wisdom prayer, which is, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can. It's right in the Serenity Prayer. And finally, the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that the wisdom to know the difference is in the people in your network, the people that you know. And you need to access that wisdom to talk through your perception of the situation to find out what is it that you need to find the serenity to accept, and what is it that you need to find the courage to change. And so self-regard, how you regard yourself, is critical and important. And of course, we develop our self-regard when we're just tiny little infants, and those messages that get sent to us about whether we belong, whether we're valued, whether we are loved and nurtured or not. And then it's about, it ultimately is about what you believe to be true about yourself and your strength and your ability. And that's self-regard. Many of these things, are best addressed through coaching. So one-to-one work with a coach who has the competency to address some of these issues. Assertiveness. Can you speak up? Can you ask for what you need? Can you draw boundaries in your relationships with others? And this is where, we sometimes need to speak truth to power. And there are ways to do that without being rude or impertinent or insubordinate. There are ways to do that, and we teach this in our workshops. So how to do assertiveness well, so you're not coming across as aggressive, and of course self-regard. You have too much of that in not the right way, and you come across as arrogant, right? It's like, if you think that you're better than others, that's not what we're talking about here with respect to self-regard. So you can have too much of these, or you can over rely on them to the extent that they come across as less effective than otherwise. So it's about having a proper balance of these different EQ competencies. Independence. So we grow up, and when we're young, we're completely dependent on our parents, and then at some point we establish our own independence, and we become separate and apart from them. We have different values, we have different ways of seeing the world, and that's critical and important that we develop our independence, because if we don't, we'll be looking for a significant other who's just going to take care of us like our parents did, and at work we might be looking for a boss or a manager who's going to micromanage us, and we're running to them all the time and saying, okay, so I finished that, what's next? And the manager is thinking either, oh, this is great, I get to micromanage this person, of course an untrained or less effective manager, but a good manager is going to say, oh, this person's a pain in the butt, because they don't just know the job, take the job and run with it. So we have to develop their independence. How are we going to do that? And again, once you have some coaching skills under your belt, you can coach those people to develop their independence, and they're much better off, and they're in a much better position to exercise courage, to face uncertainty, because they have that degree of independence. Problem solving. So problem solving in our emotional intelligence model is all about the fact, once again, that logic and reason never works in a vacuum. It always operates with emotion. And so, do you understand the extent to which you possibly avoid problems because they're scary? Or the extent to which you worry about problems, or procrastinate when you should be, getting down to work. You're just going to watch one more season of your favorite series on Netflix before you actually get down to working on it. And that's all emotional. That's not to do with the technical aspects of the problem, or that is too logistically complex. That's just emotion in operation there. And if you ever feel overwhelmed, or if you fall victim to unconscious bias is our brains searching for shortcuts and feeling comfortable with selecting someone that we know, not necessarily the best candidate, but someone that we know, or someone that came from our same hometown, or went to the same college or university we went to. That's called affinity bias. In fact, there are 147 biases that you can look them up on Wikipedia, 147 cognitive errors that we all make all the time, which are purely emotional. We make decisions because we want to fit in. We make decisions because we are comfortable with certainty. We make all kinds of reasons which are all emotional. So it's about understanding that with respect to problem solving. Stress tolerance is having this ability to tolerate and be in difficult and challenging situations. And Yerkes and Dodson created the Yerkes-Dodson law in 1908. And they talked about the fact that we need stress. They called it eustress. And we like to be in stress without any stress at all. That's what we think we all want. But then we get bored. Right? It's like, okay, I need some stress in my life. And so we go off and find it. But we need optimum stress, not too much stress, because that's going to take us off on stress leave possibly, but just the right amount of stress. So what's that? We feel challenged, we feel engaged. And so what's that amount? So again, once we develop our skills in these areas, we're in a better position to face uncertainty. We're going to build our skills to be able to manage and face uncertainty. So let's look at EQ and vulnerability for a moment here. And I'm just conscious of my time. We have 3 more hours, right, Kalpna? I'm thinking that something like that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm thinking that we have to end at something like maybe 2:30. Is that what we're shooting at ending? 15 minutes or so for questions, 2:45. So yeah, anybody who wants to, I haven't had the chat box open, so I'm just going to open it up again, take another look here. Crisis response management, peer education. Very interesting. Thank you. Yes, so happy to have David present again. He's the best. Well, I don't know about the best. He's good. Let's say that. Session ends at 2:40. He has a healthy self-regard. Tries not to have too healthy a self-regard, but a healthy self-regard. If we go to 2:40, we should be fine. Okay, I'll shoot it ending at 2:40. Thanks, Kalpna, for that. Okay, so EQ and vulnerability. Brene Brown. Love Brene Brown. She has, given us so many wonderful resources, great books and TED Talks. She said, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. Wow, vulnerability, our greatest measure of courage? Think about that for a moment. Our greatest measure of courage. I love what Brene Brown said about critical comments on social media. She said when she very first started in this business, she did her first TED Talk, which just blew up the internet. She said she started to read the comments and it really stressed her out and got her down. At some point, she realized that she wasn't going to listen to anyone. And she has this whole analogy of being in the arena. And that's kind of the battleground. That's where life happens. That's where you really get into your life and being wholehearted. Another one of her concepts. She said, unless you're also in the arena getting your ass kicked, I don't care what you have to say. And it's just a really great way to think about comments, right? It's like, unless you're also being courageous like I am in putting my work out into the world, I don't care what you have to say. You can be an armchair critic if you want, but those comments mean nothing. Unless you're also, being brave and putting your work into the world. Okay, so self-regard. Again, having a healthy self-regard is going to allow you the comfort to be vulnerable, to reveal more of yourself to others. And emotional self-awareness is going to allow you to know yourself. And to understand how you operate emotionally, know what pushes your buttons and what doesn't, and know what you're feeling and why. And emotional expression is the sharing of your emotions with others. And interestingly, we don't trust what we don't know. So if you're a leader and you don't share your emotions, then people aren't going to trust you as much as they would otherwise. So how do you actually dig deep and introduce more emotion into the conversations that you have with employees? So I think that how you're feeling is what we all want to know. So if you have to talk about some technical aspect of the work and you're meeting with other operators or other people in the plant, and you've got some technical thing that you need to talk with them about, while you're talking about that technical issue with them, they are trying to read your face, they're trying to read your body language, they're trying to figure out, how are you feeling about this? Are you angry because I didn't do something that I was supposed to do? Are you worried because there's some potential risk that I should know about so that I pay more attention to it? And isn't that an interesting thing about emotions? They kind of tell us where to put our attention. So if we're worried, we're going to put more attention on that. And if we identify a risk and say, here's a potential concern, then again, we're going to take measures to mitigate against that and make sure that some sort of failure doesn't happen. So again, emotions can help us to make sense of our world. They do help us to make sense of our world. And so it's much more, my thing is that emotional intelligence is much more than a thing. It's the thing. Emotional intelligence is emotions are life. If a patient is no longer able to experience emotions, a physician will write DNR on the chart. That's because it is considered that life is not worth living without the ability to experience emotions. That's how important emotions are to us. We know in a fraction of a second when we walk into a room whether we should stay or turn around on our heels and get out of there, because that's not a good place for us to be. Our emotions are telling us that. Not necessarily logic or reason. We don't walk in and sort of look around and say, oh, these people look unfriendly. We just know it and we get out of there. And so we rely on our emotions. And the more intentional that we can be about our emotions, the better, the more intentional we can be about our work and about our lives and about our leadership and about our community outreach and whatever it is that we do about our parenthood. We can be more intentional. So learning about our emotions and paying attention to our emotions is critical for thriving, for us to be in order for us to do well in the world. We need to understand more about emotions. And my guess is that very few of you took this course in elementary school where you learned all about your emotions and how to make friends and how to patch up friendships when things go sideways. We don't take those courses, and so we kind of fumble through life with the most important stuff of life and the stuff that is also important but not really critical. We learn in a systematic way. So we all learned reading, writing, arithmetic, all important, all necessary, needed stuff. But how to have a great relationship? We didn't learn that. How to clearly communicate, how to have difficult conversations, how to be courageous, how to talk about stuff that nobody else seems to be talking about, but we have to talk about it if we're going to get anywhere with this company. We don't learn that stuff systematically. And so here we are, learning about emotional intelligence, talking about courage at a conference. Okay, so just a quick question. I don't have, my book is not finished, but I will mention a couple books. And if you want to email me, I've got a great reading list. That's the easiest thing, is to send you a reading list. It's an annotated bibliography, so I can send that and share that with you. Interpersonal relationships. Again, this is a distinct EQ competency. What are your relationships like? Have you ever done a relationship audit? Have you ever tried to determine the extent to which the people in your relationships trust you? Who's in your corner? Who's got your back? Have you ever intentionally tried to build that network? Because what we know from the Harvard longevity study of Harvard grads who graduated in the 30s and looked at their entire lives, the single biggest factor in longevity is relationships. So how are your relationships? Do you have lots of them? Are they of good quality? Are they characterized by depth? Have you been able to be vulnerable in those relationships? And interesting thing about vulnerability, I have to point it out, and that is that what we men learn about vulnerability. We learn very early on that big boys don't cry. Okay, so if big boys don't cry, then what you're saying, what society has told us, is that when you're experiencing emotions, you keep them to yourself. If things are difficult, you don't complain, you don't share that, you don't talk about how painful or difficult it is, you man up, right? Just think about some of these phrases that we have for men. Man up, be a man, suck it up, princess, and all the things that men say to each other. And really what they're saying is, okay, so you've got these emotions, disregard them. You just forget that you have them, stuff them down, put them somewhere where they can't be seen or experienced by anyone else. And then we meet the person of our dreams that we really want to have a close relationship with. And they've learned from their socialization to share everything, and they do with you. And you don't share anything with them. And it either you agree to stay together and you're miserable with each other, or that relationship goes sideways and you're not together anymore. And for some really interesting critique of this situation, read Bell Hooks. She lays it on the line. And she says, because of the patriarchy, because of the fact that our societies have for generations made men central, superior, and deserving, those are all the messages that get sent, men think that they can get away with anything and everything, and they do. And women keep inviting them to come to the table of relationship, of family, of richness, and they keep rejecting the offer and saying, no, I'm okay. I'm tough, I'm strong, I'm a man, I'm an island. I'm going to go live by myself in the woods, in a little cabin, and I'm going to eat berries and kill wildlife. And that's the bizarre notions that we have about gender socialization. And meanwhile, women have all their women friends, and they're fine, and they support each other, and they're vulnerable with each other, and they tell each other what's going on and what the truth is and what's honest and what's authentic and what's genuine. And men, again, it's tough. We have to challenge those traditional notions of what it means to be a man. We have to dig deep. We have to develop our skills. If we have any hope of this world surviving, we have to develop these skills. The symptoms of a lack of emotional intelligence abound. They are everywhere, starting from misunderstanding, right? There's all kinds of misunderstanding. There's all kinds of assumptions. Assumptions rule, right? I'm assuming what's going on in your head. And it's ridiculous, and I don't check it out because what if I'm wrong? What if that's not actually what you're thinking? And then unmanaged conflict. There's all kinds of unmanaged conflict, all kinds of things that need to be talked about that aren't talked about in companies, organizations, government, public sector. You name the organization, the group of people. There's stuff that they should be talking about that they're not talking about. There's another example of a lack of emotional intelligence skills. People don't have the self-regard. They don't have the assertiveness. They don't have the emotional self-awareness. They haven't developed their emotional expression. They don't know how to have a relationship that's of good quality, that is rich rich and meaningful, and where there's so much trust that you do anything for that person. Like where are those kind of relationships in the workplace? And in industrial settings, it could mean the difference between being accident free and another accident, is having having each other's backs, not being afraid to speak up and point out when people are not following safety regs, or not pointing out when someone is wearing the appropriate safety gear. If you come from the school of, well, that's unmanly, so to point that out to another guy, I went up to Prince George one time for a workshop with a group of guys on the railway. They just lost a buddy because he wasn't wearing the vest that prevents trains from coming together, and he was walking between the trains and he got crushed. And why didn't anybody point out that he wasn't wearing that vest? And it's just bizarre things that we do because we're afraid to speak up, afraid to get it wrong, afraid to be awkward, afraid to be uncomfortable. And leaders are not afraid of that. Leaders show up. Leaders talk about the elephant in the room. Leaders point out what everybody needs to be paying attention to, and they're not paying attention. And they do because they've got the self-regard, they've got the emotional self-awareness, the emotional expression, they know how to have relationships with others, and they're good at reality testing. Haven't mentioned reality testing yet, but reality testing, again, is based on the fact that all of us have our own perceptions of what's actually going on. How do we know that our perception is real unless we test it? So I'm going to test my perception by saying, hey, Joel, Roland, this is what I just thought I heard in that meeting. What did you guys hear? Did I hear it wrong? Or is that actually what happened? Because it's kind of bizarre. And unless we do that, we could be walking down the hallway thinking, wow, that was bizarre, and not check it out with anyone else and think it's the truth, when in fact, it's not. It was just my perception. So how do you test your reality? And do you do that? Do you have a good scientific method? Do you fall victim to unconscious bias? Hey, we're all biased. I'm an old white guy. That's my bias. I was born and raised in Canada. I don't have, aside from my world travels, I don't have a lot of cultural comparisons to go by. But the best design teams in the world, they load up their team with diverse perspectives. People who have all kinds of different educational backgrounds, people with different cultural backgrounds, people who worked in different industries. That's who you want on your innovation team, right? If you're going to come up with a really great innovative idea, where are all the people with different perspectives and different ideas and different ways of thinking about the world? Those are the people that you want to add their perception so that you can come up with a shared reality that is creative, that is innovative, that is doing things new and differently. And so if the leadership in your organization, every time they're trying to come up with an innovative idea, is not shouting from the rooftops, hey, who's got an idea? I'll take an idea from everyone, anyone, from the driver, from the receptionist, from the loading dock guy, the VP finance, the CFO. Everybody's opinion and contribution can matter here and make a big difference to our ability to see things from a more holistic perspective. Okay, so that's EQ and vulnerability. We talked about EQ and courage. Okay, I'm just going to send you off for a couple of minutes to talk about some of these things that we've talked about so far. Not so bad having a cabin in the woods. Absolutely, Joel. Might be quite nice, but your spouse and your kids might think otherwise. Eating berries. Trust but verify. Yeah, great comment, Roland. Never be afraid to play Sherlock Holmes once in a while. Problem is that people feel more comfortable hiring people who are like themselves. You end up with groupthink. Absolutely, Colpita. That's one of those unconscious biases. Yeah, if you have questions, type them into the chat. We'll take them. But right now, I want you to talk to each other. I want to send you off and have you consider and talk about some of these things. What is again? What could you have more courage for? Is it simply deepening the relationships with some of the people that you work with? Is it confronting someone about something that you've not yet confronted them on? What do you need some courage? What is the vulnerability that you will be required to display in order to get to that courage? What is that vulnerability? There is a risk-reward equation going on here. If you don't risk, you don't get the reward of the richer relationship. You know those situations where you and someone that you have a relationship with, and there's something that's happened that you haven't ever really talked about, you haven't really cleared the air, it's still kind of hanging there in between you. Well, it's a bit of a risk to say, hey, we need to talk about what happened. That's taking a risk. But the reward, when you talk about it and share your perceptions and your experiences of that thing, and finally get to a point where you can move on and move past it, now you get the reward. But if you play your cards close to your chest and you never reveal them, you don't lay them down on the table, you don't say to people what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what's really going on beneath your surface, then you don't get the reward. Okay, just talk about some of these things, and I'm going to send you off to Breakout. I'm going to give you 5 minutes for this now, and then I want to see the chat box blow up with some great comments from what you talk about in your breakout rooms. Here we go, 5 minutes, recreate, and let's see how many. Oh, that's way too many. I just have to fix that now. Here we go. 5 minutes. That's so true, right? It's like, why don't people speak up? Why don't people point out things that are wrong, or that it's this fear of people shooting the messenger, right? Or maybe you didn't see it quite the right way. So again, we have to get better at these things. We have to get better at speaking up. We have to be more courageous. All right, so feel free to type in the chat box anything you heard in your breakout room that you think is worth sharing. Let us know what that is. Effective means to encourage superiors in an organization to apply more emotional intelligence to their day-to-day interactions. Yeah, great question, Roland. We get it all the time, especially as someone who has no enforcement to make that occur. Absolutely, we get that all the time, Roland. It's always like the people, at the top, they should be in this workshop. We get that all the time. Well, the fact is, they're not in this workshop. You are. And so what can you do? You can help them understand the impact. There's a huge difference between intention and impacts. Send them your way. Absolutely. Send them our way. We love that when that happens. And we do get those calls occasionally. We get calls from companies saying, hey, we got this guy. He's very senior. He's brilliant. He's, he's our best engineer or whatever. He does great work, and he's great. He got these technical skills. We can't afford to lose him, but we can't afford to keep him the way he is with other people. Will you work with them? And we're always willing to work with them if they're willing to be worked with. That's the first question. Are they open to coaching? And of course we can help. But again, how do you draw people's attention to these things? It's to connect it to things that they care about. So what do they care about? Do they care about employee engagement? Do they care about productivity? Do they care about workplace safety? Do they care about service quality? What is the metric? What is the measure that they really care about? And we can actually connect emotional intelligence to those metrics and show people how improving in emotional intelligence skills by having workshops, by having coaching leaders, etc., how that can actually affect bottom line outcomes. And you're not going to get anywhere until that time, right? Until that place. And you may be in a position where it's very awkward or uncomfortable for you to draw people's attention to those things. However, there are ways, and this is what we teach in our courses and workshops, is how to do this in a way that doesn't come across as you being insubordinate or rude or doing something that's going to cause some sort of disciplinary action, because it could be seen by you to be a career limiting move to point something out. But again, you have to summon your courage to take the risk to say, hey, I don't know if this is what you intended, but let me tell you what the impact is. When you made that decision and didn't include this team or these people, it just completely deflated them. They're dragging their butts into work every day and they're not performing because you left them out of this thing. And I don't know if that was your intention, but I just wanted you to know the impact, because again, I think that people in senior positions, I think they do stupid things because of a lack of awareness, not because they're stupid. And if you really think about it, I always hear, nope, I have a boss who really is stupid. Well, maybe you do, and maybe that is the case. But what's more likely, and the father of modern day management theory, Peter Drucker, said this in the 50s. He said, nobody comes to work to do a bad job. So that's an interesting idea. Okay, so if nobody comes to work to do a bad job, why is this manager doing such a bad job with his team or her team? That's because they don't know. They aren't aware of their impact. They don't know of the lack of morale. They don't know of the chaos and confusion. They don't know of all these things that they cause, and they just don't know. But if they knew, would they still do it? Here's the question to ask you. If they actually knew what the impact was of their actions, would they continue to do it? And most of the time it's no. And every once in a while I get, oh no, they know. they intentionally cause chaos and drive down productivity. But think about that for a moment. That doesn't make any sense. To have everybody feel demotivated. Okay, so there's another reason why people take that hard knock approach, and that's because that's the school they come from, the old school of autocratic, authoritarian leadership, which is changing. We are evolving away from the authoritarian, autocratic style of leadership to a participative, collaborative style of leadership, which again calls people in. So invites people in. We're going to manage this department together, all of us, not just me. I'm not going to go into my office, close the door, and come out with the answer to everything. We are going to figure it out together. And again, that's the only thing. That's the only way that people have accomplished great things in the world, is together, not alone. Nobody ever accomplished anything great in this world alone. It's always with others. Okay, so one of the things we discussed was the challenge of being vulnerable as a young and inexperienced leader, leading workers who have lots of experience and having the courage to work through these challenges. Absolutely, WRC, that is absolutely right. Yeah, it's tough. It's a challenge, and yeah, it takes courage to be able to have those conversations with older and experienced workers and say, okay, so I know that's what you're used to, and that's the way you've always done things, but let me show you some of the benefits of trying this new way, right? Here's the benefits of this, and sort of really doing a great sales job. You never thought you had to take sales training, in some cases as a manager, but it's true, right? You got to influence their perception and help them see how it's going to be much better when they do it in the new way. Some of them think they do it well without knowing that they're failing at it. Absolutely, and that's where the more objective you can be, and sharing of data and tracking of data, that's where that comes in to play. One of the things we talked about is the increased divisiveness, vaccines, politics, etc. All this causes stress, and people are reluctant to show vulnerability. Absolutely, Kalpana, that's so true. And once again, we have to figure out ways to call people in, to say, to not call them out. It's really easy to insult them, and it may be what you're thinking, and it's really tempting, but you have to just say, hey, I'm not going to insult these people. I'm going to find some other comment, some other way of saying, hey, you see it differently than I do. And again, just sort of being curious is a great approach there. So just curious. So where did you get that information? I mean, where did you read that? Who did you hear that from? And just being curious and maybe sort of learning more about their position so that you can replace it with maybe more credible information, etc. But really insulting people and doing what the mayor of Vancouver did is not smart. It's just further entrenching people in their positions. Good point about work and understand, embrace different communication styles. Yes, younger people find themselves in charge of older people. Yeah, it happens frequently. What a difficult gig. You are very vulnerable then. But with courage, 1 year there, you gain 10 years experience. Absolutely. It's a great learning environment. I feel like I'm good at being vulnerable and finding courage in my personal life, but at work, not so much. And this, Jen, we have to challenge and we have to change, right? People think, there's work life and personal life, but we don't change when we come into work. We don't go from being a human being to being a worker. We're still a human being with all of our emotions, our emotional baggage, all of our experiences and everything that ever happened to us. And so we have to find ways to share more of that at work, because people know when you're BSing them, and when they say, hey, what's wrong? It looks like you're going through a rough time, and you say, nope, not going through a rough time, everything's fine, and you pretend that it's not. People then are just confused, and also a bit insulted that you wouldn't share with them. So we have to find ways of saying, okay, yes, I look this way because yes, some things are going on at home. And then you share as much as you feel comfortable sharing. You don't have to bare your soul. You don't have to put everything out for everyone to see. It's just, you need to be honest. And we don't often think about when we don't tell people stuff, that it's actually being dishonest. But we have to find ways, again, of being genuine and and honest with people. Even if we don't care about them and you don't care about the relationship, try being honest and see how that works. That old saying, honesty is the best policy, is an old saying for a reason. It actually works, and it improves your relationships and your communication with others. It's easier being vulnerable, my personal life, my work setting, fears of weakness seen, etc. Yeah, absolutely, Lisa. I think that's so common that people feel like, you know, being vulnerable or sharing what's really going on at work with people, they feel like it's a weakness. And we do an exercise which is very, very vulnerable. And people, when they hear what the exercise is, they think it's a huge risk. And they say, why would you even do that? And we do it because we know that nothing bad has ever happened from people being vulnerable, in the way that we do it. And we know that it drives trust up completely. And people feel closer, more connected, more like a team than they ever did before, once they are allowed the space, the opportunity to be vulnerable in the right way with others. How might you suggest developing an invitation to an open, vulnerable conversation with superiors who maintain top-down messaging of the workplace culture? How can we interrupt that norm? Again, Sheena, it's sharing the impact that it has. And just say, excuse me, I don't know if you know this, but when you did this, when you issued that dictator order, this is what it felt like. This is how it landed on all of us. I don't know if you know that. I just wanted you to know. And really, that's all you can do. You don't have any control over how they respond to that. And if you're being honest and you're genuine and sincere and you do that in the right way, then they're going to go home and think about that and think, oh, geez, that wasn't what we intended. We didn't intend to demotivate the whole workforce. And then they might just say, hey, to their other C-suite buddy, hey, I don't know if you know, but we know what we did when we did that thing that we did. But here, this was the impact on at least one person and maybe on others. And so now they're talking, now people are again having the conversations they need to have. So that's how you can interrupt the norm. I know it's easier said than done, absolutely. I have expectations of myself, but the more emotionally invested, the harder is more invested. And I am more invested in personal relationships. Absolutely. That's very common. If they knew their impact, do they know how to change? Good question, Sean. We don't know the answer to that question. And again, maybe it is, and this happens for us as well as an organization. We are frequently brought in to give a message to one or two people, but we give it to everybody. So we say, okay, so we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, and here's why we're going to talk about it. We talk about the brain, we talk about the skills, we have exercises which get them interacting, and we give them models and ways of proceeding based on the fact that they want to create more collaborative leadership in their organization. They want to evolve, and you can intentionally evolve if you know how, but you can't if you don't. And so yeah, we have to make them aware of their impact and give them some resources and some ideas on how to change. It's the story they tell themselves, the reality that is safe. Absolutely. There's this wonderful saying that Abraham Maslow first said, and Brene Brown has made it famous more recently, and it's choose courage over comfort. And again, we want people to choose courage, to be vulnerable, to share, to take risks, and to take risks in relationships with others, to be known, to say, hey, this is who I really am. This is what's really going on with me, and see the incredible benefits of doing that. Kalpna, not good with vulnerability. No worries, Kalpna. We can have an offline conversation about that. We just have to. It's the only way forward is to be courageous. One comment that came up in our group mentioned imposter syndrome. Absolutely, there's so much imposter syndrome going around. Right, people in big senior jobs who feel like they don't have the ability, or they shouldn't be doing it, and they second guess themselves, and that's self-regard. So we go back and look at these individual emotional competencies together in coaching sessions, which are confidential. So nobody else needs to know about this. We talk about it, and we address it in those coaching conversations and find things that really work for people individually. So yeah, imposter syndrome, it's very popular. Question, if you have a chance at 2:40, think about social media. Is it slowing down progress? to go through vulnerability, risk to have courage these days. What do you think? Thanks. And it's always a risk to have courage. But this is the point, is that we take that calculated risk to be courageous for some reason, because we want people to know what we're all about. We want people to know what our good work is. We want people to know how skilled we are, or whatever it is. But it takes a risk because people will say, oh, look at that show off. They're just showing off, or they're just bragging, or they're conceited, or they're self-centered. And that's the risk you take. Some people are going to say that, and you don't have any control over that, but you do have control over how you put your work out into the world, how you put your thoughts, your ideas, your feelings out into the world, and you can do that in ways that get people's attention and say, wow, thank you for sharing that with me. I really appreciate knowing that about you, and I feel honored that you shared that with me. Right? That's the response that we get more often than, oh, that's something that happened to you, that's what you're going through, that's what you're dealing with. And then people using that against them, that's very twisted. And maybe it happens sometimes, but really the likelihood that it's going to bring you closer to others is far more likely than it's going to push you away from others. Definitely can relate to imposter syndrome. Tips for overcoming imposter syndrome. Yeah, great question, Kevin. And we go back to self-regard. And so one of the tips, in fact, thank you for that segue. Let's just go to tips, shall we? So the 5 keys here that I really wanted to get to. So thank you, Kevin, for that question around tips. So here are some keys. So I want to talk about the courage to look inside, the courage to learn more about yourself and how you operate. What sorts of things, what things light you up? What things, just destroy your mood? What things, just knowing and understanding more about this. And there's lots of ways to do that. Meditation, taking a walk by yourself, going off and staring out at the ocean, whatever it is that causes you to get off of your default operating mode. Default operating mode is oh, meditation's never worked for me, I can't do it. And what we do in default mode is we think of the wrongs of the past, and we think about all the horrible things that are going to happen in the future. We think about what other people think of us, but we can intentionally shift our concentration away from those things that are not helpful towards things that are helpful, like our strengths and the things that we can do, the things that are possible, the things that we do have in our lives. We can choose to be grateful for them, and instead of thinking about all of our worries and our fears. So again, courage to look inside, courage to be vulnerable. Try self-expression with others, and you can start where it's safe. Start with your closest friends and family members and say, hey, I've never told you this before, but I just want to, try sharing more of myself with you. I really love it when, or I really don't like this one dish that you make that I always say I love it and you seem to make more of it, but I actually don't like it. Like choosing to be honest and choosing to be out there and see what happens as a result. It pays off in all kinds of ways. So courage to be authentic. Here's where we get real, get honest. We say what's really going on. And the courage to try, test, fail, test your perceptions. That's the whole decision-making area. And then finally, the courage to come back from failure. I think it's Google or Facebook, I can't remember which one it is, but they had this motto, which was, go fast and break things, or fail often and break things, or something. They took the break things off after a while. They realized that wasn't probably a good tagline to have. But fail fast and early. This is a great idea, right? If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough stuff. So what can you try? What can you do? What's out of your comfort zone? Try that. Do that thing. What's that that thing about skydiving? If at first you don't succeed, no, skydiving is one of the things that doesn't really apply to. In any case, the courage to come back from failure, that requires a lot of resilience, right? How have you equipped yourself to be able to bounce back after adversity, after tragedy, trauma, big things? We don't learn about how to deal with those things till they happen, which is so crazy. It's like not planning for retirement, not preparing to be able to deal with incredible amounts of pain and loss and grief and tragedy and sadness. If you're not preparing to do that, it's kind of like not planning for retirement, because that pain is going to come. It's going to happen. You are going to lose people, and it's going to hurt a lot. And you need to know how to deal with that. You need to know how to have the relationships, the people that have your back, once again, that can support you through those things. Let's go back to our chat box here for a moment. So much imposter syndrome. Absolutely. We need to make imposter syndrome okay. We need to say, whenever you're on Netflix and, you have a show kind of selected and then it just plays. If you ever do that with Grey's Anatomy, you'll hear George saying at the very beginning of the series, who else here feels like they have no idea what they're doing? And it's like having the courage to say that. Who else here feels like they have no idea what they're doing? Who else here feels like they're not the right person to be in this position or this role or at this level or whatever, have this responsibility? And if that's the way you're feeling, be honest about that. And that's how we address imposter syndrome, is being open and sharing that with others. Any EQ test you recommend to measure yourself with? Thank you, Priscilla. That's a brilliant question. And the answer is the Emotional Quotient Inventory. I mentioned earlier it was the world's leading assessment tool, and our company has been using it longer than anyone else, probably used it with more people than anyone else. And so that it is an assessment tool that we are expert in. And it's different than personality type indicators. Personality type, as you know, is about preference and tendency, and that's an important part of self-awareness. But really, unless you learn what you're good at and what you're not so good at, then how are you going to develop? How are you going to change? How are you going to zero in and focus on the things that you need most work on? Does courage need vulnerability? Yeah, that's sort of what Brene Brown was suggesting, Kalpna, when she said that the way to courage is through vulnerability. Yes, we have to be vulnerable. So, just imagine you hear a noise in your house in the middle of the night. Do you go investigate? In the process of going in and investigating, you're making yourself vulnerable. So yes, vulnerability comes with, is necessary and required for courage. So you make a post on social media about something that is kind of vulnerable about yourself or your family or whatever. You have just been courageous, but you have to be vulnerable in order to be courageous. So if you want love, you have to learn how to change. Absolutely, Monty. Thank you for that. Brilliant. It is, and Shakespeare said it. It is better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all, right? It's like we have to risk. We get no benefits, no rewards without risk. It's got to come with some risk. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciated having this opportunity to talk with you today. I'm happy to take any other comments or questions for the next little while. You have to go through pain. If you want trust, you have to give some away. Yes, absolutely. And just my final slide here. If you just consider taking the EQI, if that's something that you want to do, or the multi-rater version, the EQ360, which we use with senior leadership, or if you want to talk like this in your organization, everything's virtual until further notice. And also consider coaching. If you've never had a coach, we can talk about what that means and what that might be like for you. We can always do that. So get in touch with me. We are a small company. There's about 14 of us across the country. We work with every level of government. We work with public sector, private sector. We are very easy to work with and talk about all kinds of possibilities. So, okay, so anything else that I can tell you? Yeah, shoot me an email if you want that reading list. My email's right there, david@eitrainingcompany.com. Take a look at our website and see what you might want to learn there. We have tons of articles and great stuff on our website, which is emotionalintelligence.ca. That's kind of like our blog is there, and you can see all kinds of interviews with interesting people and all kinds of great stuff. You are so welcome, all of you who are thanking me. You are so welcome. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this and get very excited about it, and love to have conversations about emotional intelligence. And I can relate it to anything you can throw at me. I can tell you how emotional intelligence is related to it and connected to it, and how developing your skills can make it better. whatever that happens to be. You're so welcome, Kalpna. Always a pleasure to work with you as well. Play us a tune on the guitar. Yeah, you might have noticed I have guitars in the background. I do use my guitars and song in my workshops and keynote talks. Very informative. Thanks. You are so welcome, everybody. Great having you here, and thanks for participating and going into the breakout rooms willingly and chatting with your peers. Thank you for that. That was just awesome. All right. Yeah, Dale, you're my neighbor, just a bit to the south of me there in the district of Saanich. Awesome. Okay. All right. Thanks, Kevin. Wish I'd lined up your talk from the start. Oh, you missed the intro. That's too bad. So next time, absolutely. All right, everybody. Yeah, any moment now. I guess you're going to be popping back to the main part of the conference. I just wish you a fantastic day, and thanks for tuning in.
Thank you very much, David. You made my job almost too easy.